This is Bible Quest. Welcome to the Wednesday edition. And I'm not sure if my video froze or not, but okay, that bell went off a little late, so I'm not sure if you've heard what I said, but here we are, Wednesday afternoon, Bible Quest. And yes, Chase, I am sober. Take it away.
Okay. We should probably go ahead and introduce the topic then. Let me just get on top of this before I get to Jeff and Joe. So the topic today is going to be sobriety and what the Bible has to say about it. But on the episode today, as usual, is Jeff Smelser. How's it going, Jeff?
Hey, very good. How you doing?
We've got Joe with us. And Elmira, how are you, Joe?
I am doing just fine, thank you.
Good, good, good. So, guys, when you hear the word sober, what comes to your mind?
Drunk.
Yep. Jeff?
Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about this. In the New Testament, it's not generally literally being drunk that's talked about. It's metaphorical, but that's where the word comes from, has being not drunk.
Yeah. We kind of do the opposite, right? I guess that would be the antonym. We go, oh, well, it means not being drunk. That is an application of sobriety. We're going to talk about that here in just a second. But yeah, the Bible uses this word, and depending on your translation, it says it a few different ways. I'll just kind of start off in 1 Peter chapter 1, guys. But as we're examining some of these, what we're going to see is that there's 6 times this word is used, and it's used in 3 of the different epistles. But someone just tell me, what would you guys say is the theme of 1 Peter?
Be holy.
Yeah, I agree with that. What about you, Jeff?
Yeah, be holy and be prepared to endure even though you're going to go through some trials.
Yeah. Okay. So let's take both of those things because I think you both are right. So be holy, or maybe another way I'll say that is you have to be different from the rest of the world. And the reason you're going to have to be different is because there is suffering that's going on. And just as our Lord suffered, we need to suffer like he did.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if we know we need to be holy, and we know that there's going to be suffering, there's going to be trial and things that we're going to go through that are really hard, then is it fair to say we need to be sober in our thinking?
Peter says so.
Yeah, Peter says so. So we just kind of back up and you look at verse 13 of 1 Peter 1, and then I'm going to ask Jeff to talk about this word a little bit. He says, therefore, with your minds ready for action, be sober-minded and set your hope completely on the grace to be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. As obedient children, do not be conformed to the desires of your former ignorance, but as the one who called you is holy, you also are to be holy in all your conduct, for it is written, be holy, because I am holy. It's there in verse 13. He says, have your minds ready for action, be sober-minded. What is this word all about, Jeff?
Well, I mean, literally, this word does originally have to do with literally being not drunk, not intoxicated, free from the influence of alcohol. But it, as you said, it's used a half dozen times in the New Testament, and it's always, in those instances, this verb is always being used metaphorically with an idea of being free from, well, take this passage. Be sober and set your hope perfectly on the grace that is to be brought unto you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. You're not living your life in a superficial way, just caught up in temporary things, short-term joys and excitement. You're living with a purpose and a God-given purpose, and that would be sobriety. I think, Chase, are we going to go through all 6 places in the New Testament? I think as we do that, we're going to see what the word means.
I agree with you.
Yes, but I'll tell you a story I heard just today, and it'll illustrate kind of the opposite of sobriety. I heard a story about an individual, a woman who is an exceedingly intelligent woman. Very accomplished academically, very accomplished professionally, well-to-do, decided she wanted to leave her husband, a very good man who was loyal to her, but she decided she wanted to leave because she wanted to find herself sexually in some unconventional ways with various partners and just try out lots of stuff. And she didn't feel like she was getting that at home. So she's going to leave her husband and go after all these things. This sounds like somebody who's not very sober-minded. This sounds like somebody who is grasping after something to give her a sense of self that she doesn't have because she's shallow when you get down to it.
And you tie that to 14, do not be conformed to the desires of your former ignorance. Before we were in Christ, there was this former ignorance that clouded our judgment and it clouded our thinking. That was the idea of being, in sober. And this woman you're sharing about would be an example of that. Okay, so does Peter address drunkenness in this letter?
I'm trying to remember. I'm going, Joe, does he?
I'm doing to you all what we sometimes do to each other. When the one guy comes in and he already has it all planned out and he knows where it is, he throws the other guys on the bus. He addresses it in chapter 4.
I knew that.
Yeah.
Where?
The very first 6 verses.
Yes, he does. Yes, he does. All right. I knew that.
So, of course, you have in verse 1, therefore, since Christ suffered in the flesh, arm yourselves also with the same understanding, because the one who suffers in the flesh is finished with sin. But you look down at verse 3, Peter says, for there has already been enough time spent in doing what the Gentiles do, carrying on an unrestrained behavior, evil desires, drunkenness, orgies, carousing, and lawless idolatry. And they are surprised that you don't join them in the same flood of wild living, and they slander you. So in verse 3, you've got this unrestrained behavior where he talks about this drunkenness and carousing. And I really like verse 4 about this. Look, they're going to act surprised when you don't join them in these things.
Mm-hmm.
And then he said they're going to take a step further. They're actually going to slander you. Have you guys ever been in a scenario where you refuse to drink with some people and it might shock them, right? And when I was a fireman and first opportunity came around where I was in an environment where there was drinking, they knew I was a preacher, but they were shocked that I wouldn't even have one beer with them.
Really?
Yes, they were like, not even one, and I said, yeah, no, I don't drink at all. When I told you all I don't drink, they interpreted it as, oh, he means he doesn't get drunk. But I said, no, I don't drink, I don't have a sip. And thankfully they didn't slander me; they were respectful. But there are instances where this happens. Jeff, explain
this to me. Suppose you had gone in, they said, hey, have a Coke, and you say, no, I don't drink Coke. Would they have done the same thing? Would they have gone, not even one? Would they make a big deal about it? Once you won't even drink one Coke, they go, oh, okay. And they'd figure, oh, maybe he's on a diet, or maybe he doesn't like the acid, or he doesn't think it's healthy. And but if it's a beer or if it's a glass of wine, then they make a big deal about it. You won't even have one.
Right. Yeah. No, there's such an inconsistency there. I think you're right. So the word sober pops up after this section. So if you come down to verse 7, he says, the end of all things is near. Be alert and sober-minded for prayer.
Mm-hmm.
I love that he ties the idea of being clear-headed with prayer. How are you going to go before your God in prayer if you're drunk or if you have something else that's clouding your judgment? I think that's a helpful admonition he gives. That's the second time. Any comments on it?
Well, I just think that there's something to be said for the word run in verse 4. That's what they're doing. Either they're running toward these things, or, as you talked there later, you're coming toward God.
Can you read your verse 4?
In regard to these, they think it's strange that you do not run with them. What did you say?
That you don't join them.
Okay. So I think that's just literally the idea of running or plunging or whatever. Jeff can correct me on that.
No, it's so the verb there is suntreko, and it's a combination of sun, which is with, and treko, trek.
Yeah.
We go on a trek. You have bicycles that are treks. They're trek bicycles because you go, and that's the word here.
Yeah. Cool. So I just think it's kind of interesting to think about, to picture this is almost like a gang of people, and they're running to the pub or whatever the case might be. And back before I was a Christian, and we would go on beer runs, where you're going to get alcohol. And if you're not running with that crowd, they're going to think it's strange. And your case is a little bit different than mine. I used to do that, and then I quit, and everybody's like, wait, what's going on? Why won't you go with us? And that was very strange for them because they had known the former Joe.
Mm-hmm. So third time this is used in 1
Wow.
You're
Verse
leaving
8.
us hanging there.
Yeah.
You froze.
Hey, Chase, one of the things you do really well is that dramatic pause. I mean, it
Thank you, guys.
grabs our attention. We just wondering what's the next word going to be coming out of his mouth.
Good.
Yeah, you
So
said
now
the
that I'm
third
back.
thing is, and then froze.
Chapter 5, verse 8. You guys want to read that?
Be
Really back up.
sober.
Yeah, go ahead.
Be sober, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walks about seeking whom he may devour. Watchfulness is associated with being sober in several passages.
Yep, that's a big one. And it makes sense, especially, we'll talk more about drunkenness in just a moment, but drunkenness opens the door to all these other sins that the devil's going to try and come at us with. But the idea here is be watchful, pay attention. Okay, any comments on the 1 Peter ones?
So just as you introduce this idea of watchfulness, there are daredevils. There are people who will just do anything, all kind of risky behavior, not necessarily even immoral behavior. Just they have no concern about pitfalls, dangers, throw caution to the wind kind of things. In an ethical way, we can have that same mentality. Just kind of throw caution to the wind and not being on guard for moral, ethical dangers in life. And that's the opposite of being sober. Being sober-minded, you're watchful for temptation, danger that you need to stay away from.
Sure. Yeah. Great point. All right, let's look at 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. One of you guys want to bring us up to speed? What's Paul talking about in chapter 5?
Those who have died in the Lord, going back to chapter 4, even the end of chapter 4, right? The coming of Christ, they're confused about how that's going to play out for particularly the Christians who have already died. Are they going to miss or not? So he deals with them, and then he says, in regard to us, we need to make sure that we are prepared for the coming of the Lord at any time.
Right. So that with that in mind, can you read 6 through 8?
Therefore, let us not sleep as others do, but let us watch and be sober. For those who sleep, sleep at night, and those who get drunk are drunk at night. But let us who are of the day be sober, putting on the breastplate of faith and love, and as a helmet, the hope of salvation.
Jeff, you said a moment ago that when you go through these different verses, you find kind of different ways that this word is applied. Joe's reading from the New King James Version. It says be sober there. Does yours say something different, Jeff?
In verse 8, no, mine says, but let us, since we are of the day, be sober, putting on the breastplate of faith and love.
So my translation, the CSB here, in both places, in verse 6 and in verse 8, uses the word self-controlled.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great definition for what being sober-minded is. We have got to have control of our actions, be sober. When we're sober in our thinking, it leads us to make really wise and calculated decisions rather than making rash decisions. And especially, as Joe set it up, the day of the Lord is coming. We need to be prepared. We need to be ready. The watchfulness of what you talked about, Jeff, is important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts on that?
Just the idea of night here. Those that are drunken in the night.
Yeah.
I was watching a little video yesterday. A guy's got a business going down in Houston. It's a food truck business, and he's apparently doing very well with his food truck business. He moved down there from Philadelphia. But they're interviewing him, and he's talking about how he runs his business. He runs his business from 7 p.m. to 3 a.m. 7 p.m. to 3 a.m. And he says the key is you want to find, he went to Houston, he says it's a big party city. Everybody's out partying. You need to find a place where they're partying out late at night, and you can sell a lot of this stuff. And you can high profit margins, they're going to spend, they're coming out of the clubs and all of that kind of thing. All right, the point being, the party scene, the people who just stay out late at night, going from one bar to the next and whatever, in a very literal sense, are not sober, but there's also an ethos, there's a mentality there of very short-sightedness. Just it's not, how do I need to conduct my life? And I'm not talking about the guy with the food truck. I'm talking about his customers. There's not a mentality there. How do I need to conduct my life to to be responsible, to be at work on time tomorrow, to get my bills paid, to take care of my family obligations. It's rather just a focus on what I want to do to have fun without a whole lot of regard for how it's going to affect anything beyond the next 24 hours. And that's the opposite of sobriety. Not just talking about the fact that oftentimes they're getting drunk. It's just that mentality is and so it's associated with people who live in the darkness, so to speak.
Yeah, good. Great thought. All right, we'll look at the last one. Then we're going to kind of broaden the topic a little bit. Look at 2 Timothy chapter 4. It's the sixth place that this is used. 2 Timothy chapter 4, and in verse 5, Paul says, "But as for you, exercise self-control," or be sober, "in everything. Endure hardship, do the work of an evangelist, fulfill your ministry." So I like ending on this one because he says to be sober in everything. It's not just in terms of not being drunk, but sobriety affects every aspect of my life. Which makes me want to ask the question, guys, what other areas can my thinking become clouded because I am willfully indulging in a sinful thing that clouds my judgment? So that's kind of going to be the framework for the podcast. But I do want to talk more about drunkenness. We haven't really, defined it and talked about it. So when you all think about drunkenness in the Bible, let's just start here. Is it sinful?
Yes.
Yeah. Pretty easy to nail down. Romans 13:13, and in 1 Corinthians 5 and 1 Corinthians 6.
And I just want to point out that Peter mentions it in 1 Peter also.
That's right. Chapter 4. Yeah.
Having overlooked that a moment ago.
Yeah, that's right. But I'll open it up to you guys. I have a passage in mind that I really like that talks about drunkenness and in specific how it clouds sobriety. But is there any passages you all want to go to talk about this?
I just think looking at people who got drunk in the Bible is a pretty, case studies are always pretty valuable, right? You look at Noah, you look at Lot and so forth. You just begin to see the consequences of drunkenness and sin that is, surrounding that, at least.
Yeah, I agree.
Of course, Proverbs 23 is going to come to mind when you talk about the consequences of drunkenness in Noah and Lot, and then you think of Proverbs 23 and that expression, wounds without cause.
Why don't we go there? That's what I had in my notes. That's what I want us to spend some time on. I like that. Glad to know that your brain was where mine was. You want to read that, Jeff? You just want to read Proverbs 23, 29 to 35?
Yeah, so Proverbs 23, starting in verse 29. Who has woe? Who has sorrow? Who has contentions? Who has complaining? Who has wounds without cause? Who has redness of eyes? Those who linger long over wine, those who go to taste mixed wine. Do not look on the wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup, when it goes down smoothly. At the last, it bites like a serpent. It stings like a viper. Your eyes will see strange things, and your mind will utter perverse things. And you will be like one who lies down in the middle of the sea, or like one who lies down on the top of a mast. They struck me, but I did not become ill. They beat me, but I did not know it. When shall I awake? I'll seek another drink.
What do you all want to say about this?
With shame, I say this, but hopefully it'll help somebody along the way. I've been there. And this is an apt description of somebody who gets stumbling drunk and hurts themselves, hurts others sometimes, unfortunately, as well. And you never know where you cross that line, into just having complete disregard for what is common sense or logical and so forth.
Mm-hmm. I like how, so a friend of mine pointed this out to me. In 26 through 28, he's warning his son about prostitutes. He's saying, hey, don't go there, don't go there. And so when you start reading verse 29, who has woe, who has sorrow, who has conflicts, who has complaints, your brain's going, oh, he must still be talking about prostitutes. No, he's not. He's talking about those who are drunkards. I find it really interesting, guys. Why, just broad question, why do most people drink if it's not for recreation and having fun?
A lot of times it's to forget. If it's not the, having fun, just going out, sort of what we always do on Friday nights, partying kind of thing, then a lot of it is associated with depression.
Yeah.
So it's almost like it's people who have woe and who have sorrow and who have conflict and who have complaints.
And getting drunk just solves all of that, doesn't it?
That's what they think, right?
It keeps them from feeling it or thinking about it in a rational way for as long as they're drunk. But as soon as they're sober again, those problems are all there, and now they're worse.
Right. And the reality that he's bringing to us is that much of the reason for our wounds and our red eye is because we just want another drink and we keep going back to it.
Yeah.
And then to your point, Joe, he talks about how good it looks. It sparkles in the cup, and it goes down smoothly. But of course, it has a very, very, I wouldn't even say bitter aftertaste. It has a killing aftertaste. The consequences are severe. And the commercials, they're really good at trying to make it look fun and enjoyable and, no consequences. But the reality is that there's a ton of consequences that come with it.
Let me mention something. I don't want to go too far down this trail, but just mention it. Particularly early on, after I became a Christian, I would hear a lot of Christians who had never drunk, who never had any beer, or they had abstained, done well, that they would say things like, "I don't know why people do that. Beer doesn't even taste good. They're only doing it for show," or whatever the case. This very passage shows something different about that. I don't think we should try to convince people not to drink because it has a bad taste. Alcohol has a very good taste. For a long time after I gave it up, I still had a desire for it. So let's don't make bad arguments to try to convince people to stop. The Bible makes some excellent arguments.
Yeah, no, that's a solid point. So here, I'm going to play a little game with you guys. So I'm going to list off, when someone gets drunk, some of the things I'm going to list off, what happens to their body and what they do. They come at a different point depending on the person and their tolerance. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to list off something that typically makes someone who's drunk do. And then I want you all to provide a Bible verse or a reason for why Christians ought not be that way. You'll see where I'm going. So someone who gets drunk typically ends up becoming very loud, very boisterous, and often extremely arrogant. Are Christians supposed to behave that way?
No. When you use the word boisterous, there's several directions to go here. But when you talk about somebody who's boisterous, that often results in, if there's a disagreement or dispute or an argument, or somebody tells them to calm down, they get boisterous in their refusal to do so, and you get the opposite of a soft answer, turning away wrath.
Yeah.
And you end up with fights.
One of the things Paul says is that we ought to lead a quiet and tranquil life.
Yep. First Timothy 2.
Yeah. On that note, we often become very argumentative and aggressive, but we're called on to live peaceably with all men. Mm-hmm. Okay, what happens to people's lust whenever they've been drinking?
They lose a control of that. I'm not sure. There's probably a better word than that, but
yeah,
inhibitions drop.
Inhibitions is the word I came up with too. Their inhibitions become lower, and they are more likely to act out on their sexual passion or lust, is maybe the way I would say that.
How many times has somebody made a pass at a woman at a Christmas party, a company Christmas party, or really anywhere, that they're later ashamed and they're embarrassed, and they would have never done it if they weren't drunk, and they try to explain, "I'm sorry, I was drunk, I didn't know what I was doing." How many times does that happen?
Oh, yeah. And then another thing that happens when people get drunk is their tongue ends up becoming really loose. Vulgarity starts to spew out, curse words, sexual talking, that kind of thing. Is there any Bible to support that for the Christian?
Ephesians, talking about our language. Yeah.
Yeah. So the point I'm making, I heard Sewell Hall make this point actually in a lesson. Everything that alcohol does to the body is so anti-Christian. It's against what we ought to be. I mean, you just go down the line. And so why would I even want to sip? Why would I even want to start the process of getting into any of that when I know that it only leads to doing things that are anti what a Christian is supposed to be?
And so maybe by drinking a little bit, I just become a little bit of those things. Is that acceptable though?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, and of course not. What would Solomon say? What would the Lord Jesus say? Yeah, it's such a slippery slope. All right, so I'll let you guys go in the order that you want to. I gave you some off air, but drunkenness is not the only thing that clouds our sober-mindedness. What else do you guys want to talk about that clouds our sober mind?
So in my mind, one of the ones that when I think about people drunk with and then fill in the blank, I think of pride.
Okay. What do you want to say about that?
It's wrong.
Then moving on. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, I mean, they become sort of obsessed with who they are and how important they are, and it clouds their judgment to be able to treat others as they should, and to be humble before God.
I'm thinking about Galatians 6. For if anyone considers himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceives himself.
Yeah.
And we've seen this in people where, like you just said, Joe, their own ego blows up so big that they have a false reality of who they are. And they're drunk off of themselves and their own view of themselves. And it will only be a matter of time that something happens that brings them back down to reality. But that person is hard to be around. I think you have an example of it even in the Bible. I think David in 2 Samuel 11 is a great example of that. Just growing more and more arrogant the more that he is in his sin and thinking he can get away with nearly anything, including murder, until finally the Lord humbles him and says, "You are the man." So yeah, people drunk off of arrogance for sure. Jeff, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I don't know. See if this makes sense to you. I think there's a tendency among some people, especially young adults, to be drunk with adrenaline high, drunk with adventure, excitement, and so much so that they're constantly pursuing the next adrenaline high to the neglect of responsibilities. If somebody is one of these guys who can climb a rock wall that's sloping backwards and he can just climb up like that, and that's really amazing, and that's great if he can do that, and it's probably really good exercise, and I'm not going to fault anybody for doing that. But I think there is a point at which somebody becomes, I just got to have that adrenaline high. They become all about getting that and not about taking care of their responsibilities as a Christian, as a brother in Christ, as a part of a congregation, as a family man. They just got to have that adrenaline high, and that's not what life is about.
And just like the other, I like you using the word high here, drunkenness or getting high. They're looking for the next drink in Proverbs 23. How many of those people do you ever see finally say, like, wow, I scaled that building. There's nothing else. That's all I want to do. Now I'm going to move on. They're looking for the next building. They're looking for the next high as well.
I'm thinking of a proverb here, Proverbs 28, verse 19. Let's see if this ties into what you're saying at all, Jeff. But he says, the one who works his land will have plenty of food, but whoever chases fantasies will have his fill of poverty.
Yeah, that's right there.
Yeah. Just that idea, and normally it is in younger people, but sometimes people don't grow out of it, even wanting to make their career out of some kind of adrenaline rushed, shot in the dark business venture, instead of just working your land so you can provide food. And it's because they're drunk off of this idea of, if I'm not doing what I love every day, then, this life is wasted. And that's just a lie. I think the Proverbs would call this person a fool that you're describing, Jeff.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. I want to add that to the list. I like that. Let's talk about lust. Can guys get drunk off of their lust for someone, or can a woman get drunk off of her lust for someone?
I'm thinking about David's son.
That's good.
Amnon. Yeah.
That's a good one. I hadn't thought about him. Yeah, he is. I mean, and it does say he loves her. He at least he thinks he does.
Yeah.
And he becomes sick because he is so infatuated with her. And how many wicked and vile things does he do in 2 Samuel 13 in his attempts to get this sister of his?
Right.
So when you think about all these things we're talking about, whether it's this category of lust, or it's the adrenaline high, or it's the pride thing that we talk about, put the word consumed in here. When I'm consumed with any of these things, it just crowds out my focus on the things of God, on things that are eternal.
Yeah. On the lust thing too, I'm thinking about Samson. We remember some of the details through that story, right?
Yeah.
So I want you all to imagine, right? So Delilah was a Philistine, correct?
Yeah.
All right. So okay, already she's a woman among the enemy, and he's infatuated with her. He is just so engrossed in her, and she begins asking him about where his strength comes from. And you guys fill in the gaps. What does Samson at first do?
He tells her a lie.
Yeah, he tells her a lie, and hoping, of course, that that's just going to be the end of it. She'll just go on believing that this is where the source of my power comes from. But what, of course, does Delilah go on and do?
Pesters him till he does finally confess. But
Right.
he tells a couple of lies in that
Right. Well, she tries to undo it. So
Oh yeah.
when he learns, oh, I told her the lie, and she tried to undo it. That's not good for me. You would think he would wise up, right, and say, well, she's trying to figure out what this is so that she can undo it. But he keeps telling her lies until finally he tells her the truth, like you said, Joe. And then lo and behold, she cuts his hair off. Who would have thought, And you look at him and you want to say, what an idiot. How foolish are you? Well, he's drunk. He is drunk off his lust for her.
And it wasn't just for her. Before this, he had gone to a Philistine prostitute. Before that, he had seen a woman among the Philistines that he wanted to marry. And his parents, cautioned him. They said, is there no woman among the daughters of your relatives or among all your people that you go take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? The Israelites were not supposed to do that. And they're not protesting strongly enough, but they're protesting. And his response is, get her for me. She looks good to me.
Yeah.
He's just drunk with his passion for these women.
And have we seen Samsons and Amnons even in the Lord's church before? Where someone has allowed their lust for someone that is not their spouse to get them to the point where they are doing the wildest things to try and be with this person, where you're like, are they drunk right now? This is wild behavior.
Yep.
And so when should we cut that stuff off? As soon as we, the first drink, that we were talking about, tying it back to drunkenness, but with lust, the second we have some kind of thought of maybe there's something there with that person, or maybe I can make an opportunity to be alone with them so I can talk to them. You got to cut that off, because that will ultimately lead you into these foolish decisions, because you are feeding. It's like you're having another drink. You got to quit doing that.
And recognizing that the solution isn't to avoid her or him if the roles are reversed. The problem is not with that individual. The problem is with my heart, right? Because there's always going to be another person that I may become infatuated with. What I have to do is develop the restraint and self-control for myself.
Peter in 2 Peter 2 uses an expression, having eyes full of adultery.
Yeah.
That's talking about somebody who they've got this on their mind. They're looking for the opportunity. And you know what? When we all have to deal with the issue of pornography. We have to counsel people who are caught up in pornography. And what we really need to get our heads around is it's not just, okay, don't go to this particular website or something. It's to learn not to have eyes that are just going to highly sensitive to every little. Okay, let me put it this way: you're online, you see a video clip or a photograph or something. Nothing about that video clip or anything suggests that it's going to be about pornography, except that there is a very scantily clothed, and I don't mean super scantily, I just mean there's a woman in there who is not dressed well. And the temptation is then, well, I'm going to click on this. This is not pornography. It's a advertisement for a bank, or it's whatever that could be arguably innocent. But I click on it because that image has caught my attention. And if I do that, I'm starting down a path. I'm starting down a path where I'm going to respond to that urge to click because of lust. And I can tell myself, no, this is not pornography. This is not pornography. This is innocent. It's about something that's not, but it's going to start me down that path. And the only way I'm going to keep from going down that path, first of all, I get control of my heart. If I can be sober-minded in the sense that I am not just responding to the visual stimulation, and the visual stimulation is not going to be the thing that gets me to click on something.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't say that very well, but
no, I think that's great. I mean, so my mind is also in Proverbs 7, since we've been hinting around some of these proverbs. But you think about what Solomon's his warning begins with, or I guess this goes back to even into chapter 5, where in chapter 5 and verse 8, where he's talking about this adulterous woman. Keep your way far from her. Don't go near the door of her house. Otherwise, you will give your vitality to others and your years to someone cruel. To your point, Jeff, don't even start down the road. But then in chapter 7, when he starts saying, I saw this young man, and he was naive, she begins her sales pitch where he's near her corner and she just walks up and grabs him and kisses him. Well, of course, the way this ends in verse 21, she seduces him with persistent pleading. She lures him with flattering talk, and he follows her impulsively, like an ox goes to the slaughter, like a deer bounding toward a trap.
Yep.
I mean, its end is destruction. And if only we had in our mind when we were being tempted, the drunk laying on the ship mast in Proverbs 23,
right,
or this man he's in divorce court, and his wife and kids are on the other side of the room, and they're trying to determine how much alimony he's going to pay. If only that was what was in our head, I think it would sober us up real quick.
Hey, can I take us back to a point earlier in our discussion today? Back when we were just going through the passages where we see this word sober.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you mentioned what Paul says to Timothy. And so we're kind of backtracking here, but
that's okay. Go ahead.
You mentioned in 2 Timothy chapter 4, where Paul says to Timothy in verse 5, be sober in all things, suffer hardship, do the work of an evangelist.
Mm-hmm.
Can we talk just for a minute about sobriety in the work of an evangelist, sobriety in our preaching? And so I want to take us over to Titus, where Paul says some similar things to Titus, but in chapter 2, verse 7, he actually uses a completely different word. It's actually verse 6. This translation I have uses the English expression sober-minded. It's a completely different word in the original language. But he says this, the younger men likewise exhort to be sober-minded. And then in verse 7, in all things showing yourself an example of good works, in your doctrine showing incorruptness, gravity, sound speech that cannot be condemned, that he that is of the contrary part may be ashamed, having no evil thing to say of us. This passage, I think, speaks to the fact that as teachers of God's word, as evangelists, we need to have some sobriety, some self-control, some demonstrated focus on the things that are eternal and not just short-term in the way we present God's word. And here's where I'm going with this. And let me give a caveat. I have no qualms about including humor in teaching. We use humor on this podcast from time to time. Jesus, I think, used humor in his teaching when he talks about such things as a guy who has a beam sticking out of his eye, going up and trying to pick a speck out of somebody else's eye. You can't, that's a pretty humorous picture. And I think Jesus meant it to be in order to get everybody to see the absurdity of that. He could have just said, he's got a large flake in his eye, but he didn't say that. He says it's a beam. That's an impossible thing, but it's a humorous picture. It makes a point. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't use humor, but I think that sometimes it's tempting for a preacher or an evangelist to become more focused on the short-term goal of getting a laugh from his audience, or making his audience feel good, or being just kind of a jovial friend in the pulpit, than it is about what is really my objective here. If I'm going to be watchful, I'm going to help these people be watchful, and we're going to look out for temptation, and we're going to have our focus on things eternal. How should I come across in my teaching? And so Paul's admonition to Titus here about teaching the young men to be sober-minded, and himself an example in his doctrine, in his teaching, and with gravity and sound speech, so that nobody can have anything evil to say about him. I think that's an admonition that we who are teachers of God's word need to keep in mind. Let me just sum it up this way. We need to be sure that what we're trying to accomplish is the long-term eternal good, and not just the short-term, let me make everybody happy so they like me in the pulpit.
Yeah.
So in verse 6, the New King James says sober-minded. Is that connected with verse 5 for the women of being discreet, and then the older men in verse 2 of being temperate?
Yeah, so the CSB there uses self-controlled in all 4 instances.
Right. Yeah.
So in fact, this one says sober-minded in verse 5 at the beginning for the women, just as it says sober-minded at the end of verse 6. It's the same word. And if we go back to verse 2, it is the same word in verse 2 for the older men. Yeah.
And is it the same word for the elders in chapter 1 and verse 8?
In chapter 1 and verse 8, yes.
Yeah, it's a cool theme in Titus.
Yeah. So my point in that is that what older people are striving to do, younger people ought to as well, and not use the excuse of, well, this is my younger years, kind of passing it off. Older people pass it off for younger people. They're just sowing their wild oats or whatever. They're just being juvenile and things. No, young people were called to a higher standard, and all of us ought to be striving for this. And Paul doesn't let the younger men off the hook in that area.
And to be clear, I really am not against humor in the context of teaching God's word. There are a lot of times when you can use humor for a lot of different things. Sometimes you're in its really kind of tedious point, or some kind of detailed discussion or something, and sometimes you just feel the need to give everybody a little bit of relief for a moment, to break because you can dig so deep that your audience is tiring mentally, and you can alleviate that sometimes with just a little bit of humor. You can use humor like Jesus did to point the absurdity of something that is to be guarded against. There are a lot of cases where we can use humor. I'm just trying to say what I think Paul is talking about is, as evangelists, we need to be sure that we really are focused on an eternal goal, that we are sober-minded ourselves in what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. And so that gets back to our arrogant point, because I think that a preacher who is more concerned about what everyone thinks about him, so he's using humor as a way to try and get everyone to think a certain way about him, well, now his mind has been clouded by his own arrogance and wanting that attention from other people. And so he's not going to be sober-minded in his preparation, and he's certainly not going to be sober-minded in his presentation, in the way that he preaches. So I think it ties back to what we were talking about earlier, for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's it, guys. So you all, hopefully, the audience and Jeff and Joe as well, and Drew, you just see how this goes in so many different areas. Sobriety truly does affect every inch of my life. And I need to seek to do away with the things that are going to cloud my judgment. And just going back to that language in 2 Peter chapter 5, or excuse me, in 1 Peter chapter 5, we've got to be sober-minded and be alert, because your adversary, the devil, is prowling around like a roaring lion, seeking who he can devour. That's what's at stake. He's looking to get us. And so I need to avoid any kind of sin or any kind of thing that's going to cloud my judgment. Thank you all for listening today. God willing, we're going to pick back up next Wednesday with a new topic. And so we look forward to being with you then. Have a great day.